But I am Rusty Eisenberg. I'm a co-founder of Brooklyn for Peace. This is Bruce Altschuler, who's joined our coordinating committee, also for Brooklyn for Peace. So let me just tell you very quickly why we're having this meeting and what our plan is for the night, and hoping that people will end up feeling that it was worth coming out tonight. So there's an ongoing set of unaddressed issues that need addressing, and which I think it's fair to say have become much more scary now that Donald Trump is the president. How can we here in Brooklyn and of course across the country address the whole question of American militarism, the ongoing wars that are going in many, many corners of the world, as well as a national budget in which military spending essentially outstrips anything else. So that's, kind of familiar piece. The other piece, which makes this meeting a little bit different, is I think one thing we've all seen throughout the country is that Donald Trump poses a threat to so many things. So one positive thing that has happened is that there's been a tremendous upsurge in public activity, talking about politics. We need to be active across a wide range of things, but also we need to find ways to unify. And I really want to emphasize that. We need to find ways to unify. We now have a president a Supreme Court that's divided. We have a House and Senate that is in Republican hands. This is an open field for an overpowerful executive to do amazingly terrible things. And I think there's a sensibility that if we stay in our little silos and don't really find a way to build strength, we are going to be too weak. Right, that we have to find ways to cooperate. And everybody sort of says that all along anyway, but we actually mean it now. Like, how in the world are we going to cooperate? And just real quickly on Brooklyn, I think it's not irrelevant that the single most powerful Democrat in the United States is about 2 miles from here, right, is Charles Schumer. How he behaves about a lot of things is enormously significant. And some people in this room have probably noticed that he's not always wonderful. Call me, his natural instincts is, how can I make the world a better place? And our intention tonight is we have people from some different groups that are active in Brooklyn. And so a big part of it tonight is just informational, literally for people in the room to hear what different groups in Brooklyn are doing. So we have that in our head. And then we would like to move from that into a discussion about, what is the way forward? Nothing might come out of tonight except thinking. Really, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we're not gathering people here to make a decision and vote on a platform. We're here to listen, learn from each other, share some ideas, understanding that this is a new situation for all of us and that we stand to learn from each other. So I'm going to turn this over to Bruce.
Well, what we've done is we had so many people who wanted to speak about their groups, which is great. So what we did was we divided people into 2 sets. We've got 7 people who will talk for about 3 to 5 minutes to tell us what their group is doing in reaction to Trump's election. And then we've got a number of other people who will speak a little more briefly about what they're doing. So we're going to start with Molly Nolan, who's going to talk about the Brad Lander initiative.
She'll tell you.
I've been involved with 2 groups of activists. One is attending the Brad Lander meetings, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the other is activism that's going on at NYU, where I teach, which parallels activism going on lots of campuses, which centers first and foremost on what it might be to make various universities sanctuary campuses so that undocumented students, staff, and in some cases faculty will be protected. I've been to the first 2 Brad Lander meetings. He called a week after the election a Let's Get Organized meeting. 1,000 people came to the Garfield Temple, and at that meeting various groups presented what they were doing. At the second meeting, which about 700 people came to, we divided up into a variety of groups to begin to talk concretely about what could be done on a variety of issues, whether it was schools, immigrants, Islamophobia, thinking about next elections, protecting women's reproductive rights, dealing with racial issues. 2 things I think, or 3 things are important. One is the enormous outpouring of people who are there and who seemed willing to dig in for the long haul. The second important thing is that much of what people are thinking about is how to defend against the very worst things that are happening at the moment, how to really protect people who are most endangered. The third thing, which is of particular interest to those of us from a group concerned with militarism in peace, is that those issues have been every bit as much off the agenda organizing there, also at NYU, as they were during the election. And it seems to me one of the real challenges for people concerned about the militarization of our society, the enormous size of the military budget, and the catastrophic foreign policy, which endangers many in our community, which is key to why we are having the global refugee crisis that we're having. We have to figure out how to work with other groups to make those connections, to explain why some of the problems we're facing have to deal with that, and to combat some of what Trump's foreign policy might be. And everyone is really having a hard time figuring out what it's going to be, but it's probably not going to be good on any number of issues.
Ivanka
starting
knows.
with, for example, the Iran nuclear deal, vast increases in the size of the military budget, and the like. So that is, I think, a challenge for all of us. The one takeaway I'd like to share with the organizing on campus at NYU, which is, first, how do we protect the many undocumented who are there? How do we combat Islamophobia? How do you make the idea of sanctuary not just rhetorical but real? And students and the faculty of Color Caucus has done really very, very important work on that, although administrations are reluctant to commit to something like sanctuary. We have people like Ken Langone on our board of trustees, and let me tell you, the president doesn't want to offend him. So that's a real battle there. Students want to be involved. They often don't know about groups outside in the community, and we're trying to put them in touch with groups to know what they can do on campus and off. But one of the things people have also stressed, and I think we need to think about, is how to build transnational connections, because in many other countries, the resurgence of xenophobic, neo-fascist regimes, very dangerous kinds of nationalism are happening, and we need to not only think about our situation here, but build bridges with others to whom we can combat what is happening that is so dangerous.
Any upcoming events that you wanted to let us know about?
Well, there is another meeting that Brad Lander has organized, which will be on Tuesday, December 20th at the Garfield Temple at 7 p.m.
Thanks, Molly. Okay, next speaker is Mimi Bluestone from 350 Brooklyn.
Okay, so I'm from 350 Brooklyn. We're a local affiliate of the international climate organization 350.org. And so our focus tends to be more regional, more local. We obviously have an international crisis going on in terms of climate, and we also have a national crisis because we are looking at a cabinet chock full of climate deniers, which is just the height of insanity. And that's not our focus in 350 Brooklyn. There are a lot of national organizations that are really taking that on, and we support that. 350.org has petitions against Tillerson as Secretary of State and Scott Pruitt as EPA Director. We're kind of doubling down on something that we were already doing, and I think it takes on more importance even in the as we approach the Trump administration. We're kind of focusing on stuff going on in our region. So we've been focusing on stopping fossil fuel infrastructure. Let me just ask, we did this the other night at our meeting, our 350 Brooklyn meeting, but let me just ask, how many people here have been following what's been going on at Standing Rock? Okay, so everybody knows what's going on at Standing Rock. How many people here are familiar with the Spectra-AIM pipeline? Okay, so not as many of you. How many people have heard of, the Spectra-AIM pipeline is a pipeline that's just gone operational. It's a natural gas pipeline, fracked gas from Ohio and Pennsylvania, a pipeline that runs 105 feet from vital infrastructure at the Indian Point nuclear power plant right on the Hudson River, 24 miles north of New York City. So, you know, it has a much more immediate potential impact on us than Standing Rock, although all of these struggles are completely connected, and in fact, some of the same companies who are involved in Standing Rock are also involved in the Spectra AIM pipeline. How many people here have heard of the Pilgrim pipelines? Okay, so again, not as many. There's a plan, there was a plan under consideration to build 2 pipelines, one running north, one running south, from Albany to Linden, New Jersey, that would carry Bakken shale oil and possibly fracked oil. And we're talking about some of the most toxic, dirty, dangerous, explosive stuff on Earth. Carry it by pipeline along the Hudson. A lot of it goes through along the thruway, in the thruway right-of-way, in case you ever drive on the New York Thruway. And so it would carry this very toxic fuel from Albany, which has become a major hub of energy transfer, down to Linden, New Jersey. It would be refined there and then shipped back up via the pipeline. So we're gearing up for that fight. We know that fight is coming. You know, we're not quite there yet, but we know it's coming and we're gearing up for that. We also know that there's a plan, they just closed the public comment period, there's a plan to build 42 anchorages in the Hudson River for oil barges, again, to carry the same disgusting material that we really don't need and that's killing the planet. So these are regional struggles that we are involved in, and that's part of our overall need to keep it in the ground, to keep fossil fuels in the ground. On the flip side of that, we need to promote the most immediate transition to clean, renewable energy that's possible. And as far as that goes, we are participating with the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign in I have petitions here that I have a petition that I'd like to circulate to Governor Cuomo to accelerate the offshore wind development off Long Island and the Rockaways. We lag incredibly as a nation in terms of offshore wind. The first and only set of offshore wind turbines just came online last week off Block Island. And we have this enormous potential in our region to develop this resource. So we are pushing to promote that. We're going to be at a Long Island Power Authority hearing on Tuesday to deliver these petitions, which ultimately are aimed at the governor. And, you know, we have a bus, Sierra Club is organizing a bus from Manhattan. You know, we encourage anybody who's able to come on Tuesday to join us on Long Island. And in addition to that, we're part of a coalition that I think speaks to the need to get out of our silos, which is called the New York Renews Coalition, and it's made up of 100 groups statewide. And these are environmental justice groups, labor unions, faith organizations. It's a very wide gamut of organizations, and we are all pushing for something called the Climate Community Protection Act. And we're asking everybody to call Governor Cuomo every Thursday from now until the State of the State in January and tell him that we want him to put this in his budget for 2017. So I'm almost done. So I have the petition to send around, and I also have a flyer. Oh, and one other thing. I have a flyer that explains, you know, all of these different things that I've just talked to you about and gives you some resources. I also have on the back of it a flyer for a national demonstration for climate in Washington, D.C. The People's Climate Movement, which helped organize the People's Climate March 2 years ago, is organizing a People's Climate March in Washington, and there will be events leading up to that, and we hope that Brooklyn for Peace and any other organizations that anybody here is affiliated with will participate in the coalition that is putting this together. So I'd like to give these flyers out to everybody, and just one thing in terms of I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. I just would like to say one thing very quickly. I think because we don't, you know, we know what a crisis this is in terms of Trump and national policy. it's really important for New York and states like New York and California to take a lead on climate. So it's really important for us to push this New York Renews program. Okay, sorry to go on so long. Thank you very much.
This is Ken Diamondstone, who's going to talk about the Brooklyn Progressive Action Network.
You probably haven't heard of it at this point, but the Brooklyn Progressive Action Network is one of 5 groups around the state comprising the New York State Progressive Action Network. A week ago Saturday, we all met at Stuyvesant High School, people from around the state. Over 500 were there, a number of electeds, people, many of the former Bernie people, but people across the spectrum of the left. And we, again, felt that we needed to have linkages, break down silos, and work both in the political sphere and at the grassroots level. Advocating for issues, but perhaps endorsing candidates at some point down the line. The first 2 things that the Brooklyn Progressive Action Network has been involved in is beginning to evaluate how we deal with election law in New York State. If you recall, there were 3 million people who couldn't vote in the primaries because they hadn't registered prior to 6 months before the primaries. Most people didn't know who was going to run. Most people didn't know it was going to be an issue, so they didn't register. And there are many people who registered as so-called independents, not knowing that that precludes them from being in the most important aspect of our elections, which is the primaries. So that's one aspect. We want to change the election law so that we have day of election registration, early voting, a number of changes that we believe would change the tenor of our democracy in New York. The other issue was to address the issue of fossil fuels. Our immediate issue was the Dakota Access Pipeline. Our first effort was to try and recruit city council members, and several of them have been extremely excited about a resolution asking the pension funds and our controller to divest from the pension funds. I mean, to divest the pension funds from the banks and the fossil fuel industry. So those are the 2 things that we're working on. We're working with Tish James and others who are excited about this, and we'll have more to say later on. Thanks.
The name of the organization.
It's called the Brooklyn Progressive Action Network, BPAN. And I hope to be able to, that we'll be able to talk about that more.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, our next speaker is Debbie Allentasser from the Muslim Community Network.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, peace and greetings. I can't believe here we are again on something very important and critical, and it takes somebody like a Bush, who's a Trump now, to bring us all together. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I just feel in such good company, and we all are feeling just very distraught and raw and can't believe the time that we're living in. This is actually my 5th meeting, and I didn't even know I was on the agenda, so I'm glad I actually came, because that would have been a problem. But I appreciate you giving me the opportunity just to really give you a snapshot of what's actually happening in the American Muslim community. I'm sure that many of you have been actually seeing a lot of news along the lines of hate crimes. And what's happening. There are a lot of incidents, unfortunately, that are also not being reported for a variety of reasons. One, the victims don't want publicity. 2, some of the victims are not even reporting the incidents. And so this is something that we're dealing with within the community to help educate the community that they have to report them, so that way we have an understanding of what's actually happening. So I want to share with you some statistics of what has occurred in regards to they're all incidents, and some of them are hate crimes, some of them are verbal, some of them are harassment, and what have you. So in total, since Election Day, up until yesterday, there have been 65 incidents that American Muslims have experienced, and I'll give you the breakdown. In New York City. Yes. Okay. So 8 of them have been public accommodation and government services, people going in and requesting a service and being denied or harassed. There have been 4 in New York City schools to children. There has been 1 denial of service in a it's a non-governmental place. There have been 10 hate crimes and physical violence. So these are hate crimes that actually basically were physical. There have been 17 law enforcement incidents, and I'll give you just an example of some of them. What we've been experiencing is that there are members of the Muslim community that have people calling 911 for suspicious activity. So an example of this is my friend Zainab, who's actually a Latina Muslim who lives in Bay Ridge, goes to the gym in Bay Ridge, decided to get there early, found a parking spot, and sat in her car for 20 minutes making phone calls and texting. Someone in the neighborhood saw her there. They called 911. Towards the end of the 20 minutes that she was there, what ended up happening is she was walking out of her car, 2 police cars roll up. 2 police officers come out and ask her a whole bunch of questions for over 10 minutes. They didn't believe that she was a resident in Bay Ridge. She showed them her driver's license, which was a Florida license. They still didn't believe her. They asked her if she has a utility bill to show them. Didn't believe her. She invited them to go to the gym with her. They weren't interested eventually, but they basically left her with the notion that, that there was an open case. And so after they left, she contacted a couple of people, including myself, and she was freaking out because they told her there was an open case. So if a police officer tells you there's an open case, what are you going to think? So she spent 24 hours in, just worrying about what this open case is. We contacted the local precinct. We couldn't get any information of what was the situation. We called One Police Plaza. They looked into it, and it was a neighbor in the neighborhood who decided to call, and the reason that they went out was because the person left their name and they wanted a report back. So what we instructed her to do was to actually file a complaint with the Civilian Complaint Board, and she's done that. And right now what we're doing with Brooklyn South, the NYPD, is working with them to do a Know Your Rights, not necessarily for the community, but more for them in terms of how they need to be culturally sensitive. Many of the members of the Muslim community is already feeling victimized, and then when you are harassed by law enforcement, it's doubly victimized. So that's some of the incidents that we're facing in terms of law enforcement. There have been 19 harassments, just simply people walking in the street and someone saying something to them. And there have been 6 vandalizations. It's horrible, it's horrific. I don't know what to tell you, but this, resonates for me just like the days after September 11th, and I feel like right now it's much more heightened. The fear in the community right now with the new administration coming in is along the lines of this registry. What is it? What is it going to be? Is it similar to the sneers, if you all remember, after September 11th, where we had, the 22 nations, the axis of evil, where men the ages of 16 and I think 35 or 45 had to register. So nobody really knows what is going on. I actually went to a meeting on Monday, a national summit of Muslim leaders from across the country in DC, and what we did was just simply start looking at what has taken place in the past and what the possibilities are and what we can organize and do. What it all boiled down to for each of us is to really go back into our local communities. And as you all know, all politics are local. Is really organizing within our own locales and figuring out what works best for us. And as more information comes down from this administration in terms of what they're planning to do, then we just need to calibrate and do what we need to do. On a local New York State level, I don't know if any of you heard today, Trump met with Peter King, Congressman Peter King, and his recommendation to the new president-elect is to actually develop or reinstate, or whatever you want to call it, Muslim surveillance on a national level. So this is what we're dealing with on a state level, is someone such as him, proposing this. There is nothing else. There's so much I could tell you, but I don't want to take up the time because I feel like a lot of people have come to ask questions, to learn, to mobilize, to organize. So I'm going to end here. I will be here for the duration of the meeting. If anyone wants to come see me, please feel free to do so. I should tell you one more thing because I just remembered my organization. The Muslim Community Network, which is a nonprofit here in New York City, does citywide work. On November 9th, serendipitously, this was not planned. We actually put up on our Facebook page a self-defense class. Within 10 hours, it was sold out. Our Facebook page was actually shared over 400 times, and we had 2,700 women who signed up for self-defense classes. Sadly, these women are not all Muslim. Majority are Muslim, but there are actually Jewish women, African American women, Latina and immigrant women, and gender nonconforming women who actually want this training. So we've already done 3 classes. We've accommodated 260 of these women. We still have 2,400, a little over, that we need to. Obviously, funding is an issue. It's a monthly workshop that we were planning to do. We had no idea that this many women were going to actually apply for it. So stay tuned. There's actually been press about it, and we're praying that people will make small donations onto our website, whatever, to just help us make sure that each and every one of these women feels safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonine Pierre. Antonine is from the Brooklyn Movement Center.
So thank you so much for inviting me out here. My name is Antonine Pierre. I work in an organization called the Brooklyn Movement Center, and we are a community-based organization. We're based in Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights. We work in Central Brooklyn, and we do this local organizing that this sister was just talking about, right? Like, we really are focused on how do we do self-determination work in a historically Black neighborhood that is being highly gentrified, and how are we doing work that is also being done in lots of other Black neighborhoods around the city, and linking our efforts citywide to really change, or really stop and change a lot of the things that are happening in this city. We are inherently devoted to the self-determination and building the leadership out of Central Brooklyn. And for us, that looks like being a multi-issue organization. That looks like working on policing, on gender and sexualized street harassment, on citizen journalism, like really asking the right questions about gentrification, on environmental justice, and food justice as well. So when we think about Trump organizing, on November 9th, when we were in our office, actually we were supposed to be preparing for a town hall about policing in Crown Heights, we realized that the work is, we were gonna have to really make some tough choices to really be in integrity around the campaigns and the work that we're already devoted to, and to be able to do some of these pivots that would really be necessary to make sure that we're really responding to this horrible Trump administration that we were about to be up against. So what that looked like for us was that we had a post-election gathering a few weeks later, and we brought together all of our members to say, hey, members and new people, right? Lots of people were like, we're excited, we want to be down, we want to do the thing. So to bring people in and to say, let's actually look at our work, let's look at our campaigns, let's think realistically about what the opportunities and threats are going to be in the coming administration, and let's set some goals. Let's also, again, recommit to these things and not say that all of a sudden we're going to be doing immigration work, but how can we partner or continue to partner with orgs that we already work with, like the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, like Desi's Rising Up and Moving. So when I talk about like the work that we're doing in terms of Trump administration, anti-Trump administration organizing, the biggest places where we're seeing we're gonna have impact is really around police accountability and around community safety. So in our police accountability work, we have a cop watch team in Crown Heights. we're in the process of forming a rapid response team that would respond not only to incidences of police brutality, but would be able to respond on a policy level. So to be able to mobilize people very quickly to do like packing the courts and being able to do rallies and press conferences. So we're in the process of starting our rapid response team. And we are doing policy work. We're on the steering committee of Communities United for Police Reform. So we're still pushing for the Right to Know Act. We're still pushing to get some accountability from Mayor de Blasio around the killing of Ramarley Graham 5 years ago. So we see all of these things as really being vital, not only in changing the current system as we know it, in terms of police accountability, but really, how are we self-determining ourselves? How are we self-determining? How are we actually creating systems that live outside of policing? Because we know that we can't just say that we're gonna either get rid of police or reform police, but how are we actually decreasing Central Brooklyn's reliance on police and policing? So part of another piece of that work is also with Communities United for Police Reform, being able to gather information and data on who is actually doing community safety and community policing, alternatives to policing, I should say, practices. So, for example, the Brooklyn Movement Center, with our anti-street harassment work, we have a bike patrol. And bike patrol is like groups of women and gender nonconforming people who are frequently harassed, going out on bicycles and intercepting harassment, I should say, and also giving people information about what it's, about how to protect yourself and how to actually de-escalate instances of harassment. So that's the kind of thing that is actually often not thought of as an alternative to policing. So we're looking to talk to other folks who are also doing alternatives to policing around gun violence, around domestic violence, around violence that happens in our neighborhoods and our streets, so that we can start to say, actually, this is what a world without police would actually look like. This is not like a fun visioning activity. These are the concrete things that would make a community without policing. This is what it would look like. So I say all of us to say we're really pissed and mad about Trump, like everyone here, and we're really redoubling our efforts in terms of community policing, because we see that as being not only the work that is most can be within our organization will be most viscerally attacked, but there's also the greatest opportunity for us to be generative, for us to not always be on defense, for us to play a little bit of offense here. And we're also thinking about, what does it mean for us to be able to bring people together in this time of crisis within the police accountability work and sustain it, right? So I think November 9th, everyone was making phone calls, everyone wanted to join a thing. And when we had our meeting, it was really important to say, look, we know a lot of you aren't gonna be here 6 months from now. And to really keep it real with folks, because we understand that our job is to agitate, and our job is to let people know that the work is gonna be ongoing and that we're gonna be here through Trump or what have you. And it's great to have people be excited and be mobilized, and we also just need to keep doing the work that we've always been doing. So I also did want to add that we are also, again, in terms of being integrity, we're not trying to recreate the wheel. We're not trying to suddenly say that we do anti-hate violence work, because we don't. But what we are doing is thinking about, well, what do safe communities look like outside of alternatives to policing? What does it look like? What do we need to have in place to be able to even direct people to respond to the kinds of hate violence that we are going to be seeing very soon?